Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them and how you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that'll work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable revenue coaching to learn more.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. Just a quick note, if you haven't already hit that subscribe button, you want to do that so that you get notified whenever we put out a new video. But today, we're going to be talking about something very interesting. If you are orienting your company and your sales process to your company's measures of success instead of your customers' measures of success, you're going to lose deals. And on top of that, if you don't understand the emotional aspects of the sale and you're just focusing on the functional and the social aspects, you're going to be losing even more deals. I'm your host, Sarah Hicks, and today on the Predictable Revenue Podcast, I'm going to be chatting to an expert about how to use jobs to be done to understand your customers better. He's the founder of Product Tranquility, a consulting firm based in Austin, Texas. He's considered an expert on helping high-volume B2B SaaS CEOs define pricing and packaging for new products. He has 15 years of experience in managing multiple products throughout their different life cycles, from startups to publicly traded multinational enterprises. And prior to founding Product Tranquility, he went on a sabbatical and completed a solo round-the-world expedition to 21 countries. Dan Balcauski, welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to dive in. Tell us, just to set the scene, what is the jobs to be done theory?
Absolutely. So at the core of it, jobs to be done is the idea that products are hired by customers to do a job. And it gives us a framework to help focus on why customers buy products, why they bring them into their lives, and really drives us to focus on the outcome customers are trying to achieve and the struggles they're facing. It's really based on the premise that products match problems, not people. And these problems are stable over time. So if I use a simple example, broadcast communication at a distance is a problem. In the ancient past, we may have used smoke signals and then used lighthouses, and today we use Twitter. All of those are solutions solving the same customer problem. So it really focuses us on understanding those problems, as well as the context. That's one key part of the jobs to be done theory, is that context is decisive, not specifically the person. Problems arise in specific contexts. So for example, when I'm working out at the gym, I want something with electrolytes so I don't get a cramp. It's independent of my characteristics as a 39-year-old male living in Texas. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the context that I'm in that particular moment. And many times that context will also dictate the constraints. So there's a lot of the helpful parts of jobs to be done that it helps us focus on exactly the situation that our customer is in and what problems they're trying to solve.
Very interesting. And there are multiple jobs within the jobs to be done theory. Can you walk us through those and kind of how they apply to the sales process?
Absolutely. So jobs to be done outlines several different types of jobs. So there are functional jobs. These would be, I need to accomplish some action, and then product performance is key there. But there are also emotional and social jobs. And so what jobs to be done helps us is understanding not only that our products have to meet some functional requirement, but also there are emotional needs on the parts of our customers that have to be met. So using a simple example from, like, if I was booking a vacation, maybe using Airbnb, a functional job might be, when I'm looking for a place to stay on vacation, I want to filter by price so I can find a place that meets my budget. So obviously that maps directly to a functional outcome that the customer's desiring. But also you might have an emotional job. Like when I'm booking a place to stay on vacation, I want to read reviews from past guests so I feel safe staying with this particular host. And if you don't understand both, oftentimes in a sales situation or really in any situation where you're trying to move someone to make a change, addressing emotional concerns are just as important as addressing the functional outcomes as well.
Interesting. And What do you think the social, like, is there a social example within the Airbnb, example that we're giving? I want to understand that one a bit more.
Yeah. So social is some derivation of potentially status. So is it easy for me to take my experience and potentially show that to others, via social media, so there might be, and you can see how the world of functional, emotional, and social may combine into building actual functional aspects of a product or talking about specific aspects of a product, but they're solving fundamentally different needs. Because I've gone on this amazing vacation, I want to shout from the rooftops, maybe give public reviews, so that I have a authority as a traveler that can then help other guests. That could be also another social component of it, right? I'm actually going to go give reviews because I'm an active member of this community, and that confers social status on me as well.
Okay, very interesting. And in a little bit, listener, we are going to dive into this in kind of a really specific B2B context, so you can understand how the jobs to be done theory kind of maps onto a business that you might be familiar with. But it's often much easier to like understand something when you think about it in the B2C context, because you're a C and it's kind of easy to see yourself in those shoes. Cool. Very interesting. Okay. I want to dig a little bit deeper on the emotional side of it, because that's something we talked about in the intro. It's one of the biggest things that you just mentioned that salespeople often miss. And it's also key to persuasion. So tell us about that and how those two things kind of go hand in hand.
Sure. So with jobs to be done, you really have two different movements, I guess, in terms of a customer making progress towards their outcomes. So you've got different forces on their movement to make progress, I should say. And two of those are pulling them forward. So there's the push of the current situation. There's some discomfort, anxiety, functional aspect that's not happening in the current status quo. And then there's the pull of a new solution out there. This could be better in the future. But there's also inertia pulling that person back from making progress. So the anxiety of what could happen, what if I make a wrong choice? What if this product doesn't work as expected? And also the other force pulling them back is attachment to the status quo. People tend to be very comfortable. Inertia is a very big thing. And especially if you're working in a B2B context, there may be multiple stakeholders with processes and training that has to happen. And so that can be very uncomfortable to, we'll just deal with this right now. And so identifying these emotional struggles can help you empathize with your prospects' struggles. And that's really the first part of helping lead people to change. And because if we don't feel we're being understood, we're not going to move forward. We're not going to feel that sense of trust that this person has our best interest, because they don't really understand the struggle that we're going through. And it also gives us ways that we can address those potential objections and move those, decrease the anxiety, increase the discomfort with the status quo and how bad it is, right? So it gives us a framework to apply leverage to those emotional obstacles as well. And this is important because, again, even if your product is good enough functionally, people make decisions based on emotion, even in a B2B context, oftentimes. So there's the old phrase, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. That has nothing to do with the quality of IBM's products and everything to do with, if I make this choice, at least if it turns out badly, I'm not going to get fired. And that's a very raw example of how these emotional situations apply in B2B.
That's so interesting, because right now there's certainly a movement among sales leaders, sales practitioners to be more pain focused, with maybe not a whole lot of understanding of why that works. But it really is what you're talking about now. It's because you're referencing the discomfort and like as you said, you're leveraging like that emotional attachment or lack of attachment to a current situation. And that's why it doesn't work when you say like, hey, we have this great product that has these great features. Want to buy? No, because I just don't see myself in that. But when it's like, how are you dealing with this horrible, painful thing that you have to deal with every day? It's like, oh gosh, how am I? Now I want to potentially solve that. So that's so interesting to to be able to understand kind of the underlying, the theory, the jobs to be done theory that maps along with that. Where does jobs to be done actually come from?
It's been around for decades. It has probably its kernel there was a Harvard Business School marketing guru, Ted Levitt, who wrote a couple famous books and notes where he talked about customers don't want a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. Peter Drucker, customers rarely buy what companies think they're selling them. But it was really sort of formalized by a few folks, notably Clayton Christensen at Harvard Business School. The founder of, or the developer of the disruptive innovation theory. Also a gentleman named Tony Ulwick, who has a strategy consulting firm called Strategen. Both of them were key contributors to the current jobs to be done theory.
Very interesting. Well, let's talk about this B2B example so that we can really understand, walking through a company who has done this successfully and how they did that.
So the problem you usually run into as soon as you start consuming jobs to be done material is there's a lot of reference to physical products. You'll hear about milkshakes and mattresses and power tools. And so a lot of companies started looking at software companies started looking at this and saying, well, this is great, but how do we apply this to the software world? And so one of the pioneers in that space was Intercom, and they've used it extensively. So Intercom, the little chat widget that you get whenever you visit a website, allows for conversational interaction with you in the business. And they even wrote an excellent book on it. I highly recommend. It's only, I think, 30 pages. You could probably finish it in 20 minutes on their journey with jobs to be done and how they've actually helped formalize some of the processes and tools that folks in the software world can use. And so did I answer your question there? I don't want to pause.
Yeah. We're just going to dive into like kind of how they've used it and why it's worked for them and kind of, that example.
Got it. So again, the problem that they found was that most people had built what we call personas in the product development world around customer attributes. So if you think about demographics like age, race, geography, level of education, the problem with these type of personas is they really don't dictate design decisions, and they don't map to actual customers in the real world. So there's some energy put into building these personas, but then they end up being not used because they don't actually map to reality. And so they started with this problem of, okay, how do we really get at a core understanding of these customer jobs so that we can dictate how our software evolves and how we're bringing value to our customers. So the first thing you'd think of is, in a B2B context, you potentially have multiple different stakeholders trying to complete different jobs. So if I take a product like Intercom, you've got a purchase decision maker, say the VP of sales or CRO. You've got the job executor, and that could be SDR, or in Intercom's case, customer support representative, many others. And then you've got also a product lifecycle support team. So think about maybe your sales operations team that has to stand up this software and keep it running. So the idea is that we want to understand each of those actors and what they care about. We're going to go through a research process to do that. So first thing is making sure that you align with the executive team inside the building to make sure that, one, you have enough time. My recommendation for folks is that they often delay doing this type of research, but it's research that's fundamental to so many go-to-market activities down the line. This helps you understand. I work in pricing, so it's key for pricing, it's key for messaging, positioning, for sales. This research affects all of those downstream marketing activities. And so the key thing is to start early. And then also, I found this from experience the hard way, make sure you get executive buy-in that different customers have different needs, because if you go into I've been in rooms, unfortunately, where there have been executives say, well, our product is for everyone. And so it doesn't matter sort of what process you go through at any point. If your executives don't believe that your customers are inherently different, you're going to have wasted your time. What we want to do then is hypothesize about what the distinctive customer types could be. And as I laid out before, right, difference between a purchase decision maker, a job executor, a product life cycle support team, we can, on the surface, think that they have different needs that will be served, or they will have different jobs that they're trying to get done that will differentiate them. But there may also be often distinctions we'll use between SMB, mid-market, enterprise, or geography. This is not a stopping place, but it's a way for us to socialize the idea of customers having different needs inside the company, get information from those frontline teams. So the sales people who are talking to prospects every day, the product and marketing teams, the customer support personnel, getting all of that data together and then using that as a opportunity to say, where do we disagree? Where is the most risk? What do we really not understand about how these customers break down? And then what you want to do is use that as a jumping off point to actually go conduct the real research, which is mostly in-depth customer interviews, then backed by some quantitative survey research. So the customer interviews within a jobs to be done format. And again, depending upon your audience, if you're in perhaps a sales development role, normally this type of activity, this in-depth research project would be driven probably by your marketing or product teams, because these are pretty intense efforts. But helping you understand the value behind it is important, because it will, as we mentioned before, it will help short circuit any resistance that you have with closing deals with your customers, helping you to qualify people, understand how what jobs they're trying to get done, and direct them to the most valuable parts of your offering. But as I was referring to the customer interviews, one piece of advice I'd give folks is there's as I mentioned before, Bob Mesta is one of the sort of fathers of the jobs to be done theory. He gives an absolute masterclass on customer interviewing as it pertains to jobs to be done. And you can get it on the web at the Business of Software conference. I highly recommend everyone listening go watch those. I've watched them multiple times. What you're trying to do in these interviews, though, is really try to dig behind the surface level answers of what people are saying are the reasons they're choosing a product. So one of the ways that you do that, similar to when you maybe interview for a job and people ask you about your past situation and how you handled that, past behavior tends to be the best predictive indicator of future behavior. And so digging into the purchase process they had around a similar type product. And so, for example, Bob Mesta in the call or the video that I'm referring to talks about a car purchase, and he does it live on set with someone. So walking them through like you're filming a mini documentary and really looking for not just how they answer the questions, but or rather not what they say, but rather how they answer, listening for the tone. Where are their inflections, where they're happy or excited? Where do they not sound excited when discussing potential alternatives or areas of frustration? And timelines matter. And you want to ask for specifics. Who was there? Who else was involved in the process? In a B2B situation, this can actually get quite complex, because potentially, when you're talking to maybe an end user, that person maybe only joined the company a few months ago and wasn't around for the purchase process. And so you may require multiple interviews, even within the same account, to construct an entire timeline. But it can often be just as important, what were the influences of these other people who were, in a B2B case, you have potentially buying committees, multiple stakeholders. And so understanding the influences that those folks had and the effectively the jobs that those other people needed to get done is just as important. And it's very easy to confuse desire with needs. So, and this is a difficult one, and it takes practice, but it's very difficult. I refer to it as the New Year's resolution problem. Everyone on New Year's says, "This is the year I go to the gym. This is the year I get in shape." And then they all sign up for the gym memberships, and then you go at the first week of February, and none of those people are there. So it was very different to say, I want to be healthy versus my life is at risk if I don't solve this problem.
Mm-hmm.
So usually what you can do to dig behind those type of the confusion between a want or a desire and a need is get at the attempts they've made to try to solve that problem unsuccessfully. Because if in conversation or interviews with prospects or potential customers, they may throw out, "Oh, this is a problem." And then if you push on them, "Well, what have you done to solve it?" Nothing. It's not really actually a problem. So, which is incredibly helpful for you to sort out, because there's a lot of noise, right? People will this is part of the problem with market research is, if it's not done properly, you can get bad information. And so it's very important to push. But again, you're trying to construct those timelines, multiple people to talk to, and potentially multiple sets of conversations, depending upon if you're looking at that end user or buyer.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting about the kind of want versus need, because that I think is one of the biggest challenges that many product companies have in going to market, is that everyone thinks that they're a need to have. And in reality, like, you aren't necessarily, and you might be to some group of people and not to another group of people. But that advice of kind of digging in and asking, have you tried to solve this before? And if they say, well, we tried this product and then this team did something, and then, we've honestly been working at this for a year, it's more likely that they're going to need your product and it's going to be an actual solution, and they're going to be like, oh, thank goodness. But if it's just like, oh yeah, that's a bit of a headache, but whatever, we get by, then that's where your competition is do nothing, is the status quo, just like we talked about earlier. It's fine.
And jobs to be done as well. I didn't mention this before, but it gives us a modified lens on competition as well. So most folks are in the B2B SaaS space are actually competing with email and a spreadsheet, not necessarily with the startup down the road. And so there's a couple examples there that I love, which one is Facebook actually competes with cigarettes. Both are negatively impactful on society, but ultimately the situation that a potential user is in is, I'm working on something difficult. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to distract myself for 5 minutes. So either I'm going to go outside and smoke a cigarette, or I'm going to open up a Chrome tab and open up Facebook and scroll. And so both of those are competition in that particular scenario. And so jobs to be done helps frame the competition in the correct way, where you're not just continually looking at, the other small company your prospects or customers have never actually even heard of, but you see every day because it's part of your life. Really, how are they trying to solve? What are instead of using competition, I'll often use the term competitive alternatives, because competition tends to be a loaded word. So jobs to be done can really help you uncover that as well.
Yeah, like, how else are you currently dealing with this issue? And in a lot of cases, it's like you said, it's like, well, we're just doing it in Excel, just like we've done it for 20 years. That's how we're dealing with it. We're not. We're just going to do it in Excel some more. Oh, that's funny too about the Facebook and a cigarette. Totally. And that's, I think, going back to jobs to be done and how we think that people are different, when in reality it's the context that like makes the wants, makes the needs, makes the pains. That's true right there. Like, this person could be anybody in the world, and their context is that they're bored and don't want to be doing what they're doing, and therefore there are these solutions that like pop up that you wouldn't necessarily imagine. Okay, I love, kind of the idea about going through customer interviews to understand why your customers actually bought from you, by understanding why they buy anything, and why they've bought similar things in the past, that kind of thing. Let's talk about in the example of Intercom, for instance, just to keep a consistent company, if we were targeting Intercom, if we were Intercom and we were targeting the VP sales, because you mentioned there's a few different, there's like the sales leader, there's the user, there's the product team, there's a bunch of people that would be involved in using Intercom. But let's say the buyer, the economic buyer, the decision maker is the VP sales. And so that's who we want to target. If I were to try to build my like jobs to be done on that VP sales without doing customer interviews, say I'm a sales rep and just trying to really understand what VP sales care about, how would I do that?
So I highly recommend that companies go through the full process. The idea is distinguishing between the end user and the economic buyer or the purchaser is they're going to have different outcomes that they care about. And so and this is relevant because if you're on the phone with the VP of sales versus potentially a frontline SDR or maybe even a frontline manager, how the message you use is going to resonate differently because they care about different things. So the VP of sales is much more financial metrics, ROI driven. They're probably very concerned about training, turnover, other internal KPIs that they're being held to. And so speaking to them in terms of how your solution satisfies those particular outcomes versus, for example, the job executor, maybe, if you're an SDR and you're Intercom, and so your job is new website video or visitors I engage, I need to be able to contact them, sort of engage them in a conversation, be able to qualify, screen them, engage, potentially enroll them for a demo call. They have a very different situation where if you have a website with high traffic, okay, well, now I'm juggling potentially hundreds of conversations at once, and how does your product help me not go crazy and want to go out and smoke that cigarette or open Facebook? So understanding those sort of functional level details when you're talking to one person versus potentially the financial ROI type language when you're talking to the purchase decision maker. In general, there's always a question that comes up, who should I focus on first? My general advice is focus on the end user, especially if you're on the innovation side, if you're on the product development side, because by solving the job executor's role better or job better, ultimately that's going to impact those top line financial metrics. But it's helpful to understand both.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. And then as far as, so if the company has completed this whole, they've taken on the research, they've distilled, and now you're having to implement the learnings of jobs to be done across, we'll talk about kind of the whole revenue generating organization. How does this impact what each of those people do? So from like SDR, AE to the sales leaders and marketing team, what piece of the jobs to be done will they kind of work with and use in their day-to-day?
Yeah, great question. So the end of that process is, now that I've done my interviews, I'm going to go execute some quantitative research to make sure that effectively the hypotheses that we've uncovered during those interviews are valid. And then we're going to do some analysis to turn those into segments or personas. So the personas are going to be groups of like customers that have similar jobs, are equally or relatively equally dissatisfied with the way their current solutions or competitive alternatives are getting the job done today. And that's going to help inform the development of these personas. And a persona is a set of jobs that are important to that particular group of customers, potentially some profiling attributes. So at this point, you may find that if we're in B2B, if you go the other direction and you assume, for example, industry vertical is the deciding, differentiating reason why people buy. So retail versus manufacturing versus financial products, financial services is distinctive. Well, that may be the case, but if you go the opposite way and look at jobs to be done, you may actually find that, oh, actually this persona is equally applicable to retail and hospitality. It doesn't really apply as much in these other ones. But if you'd gone the other direction, you just say, oh, well, this is retail. And then we have a different persona for hospitality, and we have a different one for, so helping, to understand what are the observable, we call those observable attributes that now sales can use when they pick up the phone or they're talking to someone. Also, with the jobs to be done can help, we can add a set of qualifying questions to help sales folks understand which person are they talking to, which group are they talking to. And again, what this does is helps us understand what are the sort of common functional aspects that this group cares about. So helping direct them to the areas of the product that are most valuable, which will short circuit a lot of your conversations. You have a very complex product. You don't have to have a whole lot of time on a demo call, right? So, hey, if I can short circuit that, I'll bring you right to the value based upon a couple of qualifying questions. And so it's really the process of going through this research, creating those personas, and again, I think at this point, once you've, if it's a product team, or maybe you have a research team in a big enough company, before those sort of personas are validated, I highly recommend you bring those to the frontline salespeople and get their opinion. Be like, do these make sense? Because ultimately that's going to be the value is on the front lines. It helps as well with marketing and with your product development, customer success, all parties. And this is the other point I'll make. I've seen clients where we have a different set of personas for marketing than we do for product, than we do for customer success. And I don't understand how anybody thinks that's a good idea, because if you build a product for one customer and you try to sell it to another, the customer's not going to be happy. You're not going to be happy. It's going to be a bad time. So making sure that those frontline representatives, when you design these personas, okay, this makes sense. With a couple of qualifying questions, I could figure out which, or just by observable attribute, I could figure out which of these groups these people fall into. And that goes into potentially demo scripts, et cetera.
Interesting. So helps kind of narrow down and qualify on the SDR front, helps tailor the demo on the AE front. Obviously, sales leaders, if they're the ones designing strategy, it's going to have a big impact on that. Like, you can sequence a group of people that aren't necessarily, as you mentioned, divided by industry or by title, but you actually might discover some other way of dividing them by pain and job to be done. And then on the marketing front as well, you can, instead of splitting by demographics, you're splitting by something actually much more important and impactful in business than what you might traditionally have been segmenting your audience by.
Exactly.
Cool. Very interesting. Well, honestly, I think that's a perfect place to wrap it up. People have got a lot of stuff to digest here. We've walked over some of the ways that people can go out and actually research this within the context of their own company, their own customer, the ways that they then distill that information and apply it to the sales process, and then some of the kind of underlying principles behind why this jobs to be done theory actually makes sense and kind of works. If people want to learn more from you, Dan, and they want to get in touch with you, where can they do that?
Yeah, I have a website at producttranquility.com where I blog fairly regularly. So trying to push this information out to the people so they can go do this themselves. Also, you can connect with me on LinkedIn at Dan Balcauski. I'm happy to connect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And to all of you guys listening, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to check out our weekly podcast episodes where we share relevant top sales development insights. So hit that subscribe button, please. And thank you for joining us for another episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast. We'll catch you next time.